Hello, my name is Tina Gote, and I'm doing my final presentation for Introduction to Public Administration with Dr. Richard Warch for the Department of Business at Florida Southwestern State College. I've included my certification statement, a table of context. The subject matter is education reform and school choice. Education reform is always on the political agenda. It's complex, and it often is a subject of a lot of controversy over education philosophy, curriculum, organizational management, financing, and policies. The goal of reform is to ensure all children have fair and equitable opportunities for quality education regardless of their financial needs. For the purpose of this paper, I'm going to focus on education reform surrounding the subject issues of school choice, funding and policies, as well as how it affects all levels of government. Okay. Problems and the historical background. The United States provides no constitutional obligation written into the no constitutional obligation for citizens' right to an education. Furthermore, the 10th Amendment implies that education is the responsibility of each state. States retain the authority to provide local districts with funding for their schools. 1965, President Johnson established an effort to improve education opportunities in the United States by implementing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, providing new funding to schools to improve the school performance and quality of education for low-income neighborhoods. These funds were called Title I, II, III, IV, and V. They're federal grants that brought millions of dollars to state entities who were then responsible for local distribution. They can use these funds for things like libraries, education centers, general provisions, books, so on. In 1973, with education not being a fundamental right, the state or local governments, rather, were looking for ways to fund public schools. So, how does the government fund themselves? Basically through taxes. So the use of local property taxes was an option that was now an opportunity for them to help provide additional funding for schools. So in 1973 as well, the Rehabilitation Act gave every child the right to free, appropriate public school education. So, but this also assigned like school zones. And what happens with that is that, so basically you have to go to a school within your district. So families that were poor or uneducated had less choices to pay for, had less choices. So they can't afford private schools, nor could they afford to move to other districts. So the lack of choices led to low academic performance with lower funded schools. So administrative laws came into play, trying to support low-income families in getting a quality education. So the creation of the Department of Education in 1979 by Jimmy Carter was a way for the government to fund more programs to support communities on local and state levels. With education financing. So through these programs, they can pave the way for new legislative acts such as No Child Left Behind, established in 2001 by George W. Bush, supporting the funding for school improvement, quality education for children. So in addition, it's giving low-income parents more choices. So it provides additional funding for qualified teachers, as well as the option to leave the school if they have 2 or more consecutive years of unfortunately failing grades at the cost or expense of the school that is underperforming. So in Title I funds for transportation would then go to the school that is not supporting the child. So it made education a little bit more competitive, Well, because they don't want to have their funding go to other places, so they had to improve in order to continue to get their funding. So levels of bureaucratic power in education. So there's another act that occurred. So the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge for 2011, authorized by Congress to support early learning and development programs for children birth to age 5. So what this did was provide additional funding for like a foundation to go into education. So the federal government was giving more grants in order to, again, improve the quality of learning, but starting young. So unfortunately, what happened with this is that now they have to measure whether or not the programs are working, and then standardized tests came into play, but that's another topic altogether. So bureaucratic management, because of all this funding now going to state and local agencies, they now have to manage these processes. So the bureaucratic system is now set up where you have the superintendent who reports to the school board of elected residents. Then the executive administrators have to maintain oversight for public schools and educational services within their district. So there's a lot of money basically coming to the schools, and if it's not managed properly, then obviously what could happen is that, contracts or things like that are given away, not to the most qualified contractor, but to questionable ethical standards. So the federal, state, and local government's decision to use tax revenues to help families pay for private schools is often politically continuous and has been the topic of litigation in state and federal courts. Understanding the potential impact that specific provisions may have on state and local revenues is necessary to inform policymakers about whether a voucher program design meets constituents' expectations. So basically, because of all this funding, now people are questioning whether or not they should move in another direction in terms of offering private education, so private public schools, so to speak. So that would be like a charter school, or that would be what is that word? So sorry. So it would be like a charter school, basically. So, or a private, not necessarily a parochial school, because there was some conflict with that, but understanding that taxpayers, are funding these programs, so they have to be invested in the best way. In order to give a quality education, sometimes going into the private sector helps. So, as I stated before, ethics becomes a concern. So, in the 21st century, it has been dominated by educational policies that created phenomenal profits for private corporations that serve schools. So, what this is because so much funding is now being sent to schools, now you have investments in like curriculum programs, and you have investments in upgrades for services and so on and so forth. So basically, to ensure practices of all investments are performed ethically, the government had to give responsibility to the GAO office, who supports the United States Congress in performing comprehensive audits as legislative responsibilities in accordance with the Budgeting and Accounting Act of 1921. So this includes compliance for performance and financial audits, and it evaluates program investments as well as determines whether or not resources have been used efficiently to achieve the desired results. So in some cases, educational agencies are responsible for their own program evaluations, reporting, and measuring of performance as a condition of funding. So it's important that when we place people in positions, or even elected positions, that they will act ethically throughout the process. So the GAO has identified weaknesses in the education's internal controls that have hindered education's oversight and monitoring of grantees and its assessment of the program's performance. So in addition, over the past decades, educational oversight and monitoring of these programs has been challenged, presenting risks, and we rely on public officials to work with ethical morals and consciences. So we do our best to invest in organizations rather than themselves. Private industry as a part of public. So as I stated before, you look into opportunities outside of government entities or properties or public schools to see if there are other options that can be taken to ensure that we meet the demands of, or the performance expectations. So there's no one size fits all in the United States education system. There's over $500 billion invested in education, federally funded programs. So privatization, sorry, I can't say that word, allows for more competition to offer quality services as well as quality programs that can have a positive impact on future educational outcomes if they're placed in the right location. So you put charter schools in a low-income neighborhood, and there's a charter school there, they're receiving some federal funds in order to offer these new opportunities. That allows them to achieve more because it's more of a specialized education, or they're truly invested in the program's success. So some of the disadvantages now become advantages based on choice. So private education opens doors for new investors with programs to fund with tax credit scholarships to aid low-income families, or supplementary pay for tuition from contributions. So is there a way that I could send my child to a private school and have the state help me with the bill? So these are the things that have been looked at. Okay, so I guess that's it. Thank you very much. In my personal opinion, I think that this is the direction that we should go in order to make education more competitive, and so we can achieve higher standards. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.